Hello everyone, welcome to the GODAN webinar series. On behalf of the Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our webinars today. And we are very happy to have this very important topic today on blockchains for agriculture. A lot of people have expressed interest in this to learn more about this area. So we are very happy to have two great presenters, Chris Addison from CTA and Jacqueline Board from Wageningen University Research, who are here with us today, who will talk about more on this topic. And I am now going to give the floor to Chris, who will first first lead the presentation and then followed by Jacqueline. I want to also remind all the attendees, you have an opportunity to ask questions through the chat window. Feel free to put your questions through the chat window, and at the end of the presentation, we will answer your questions one by one. So you can use the chat window for that. Thank you again for joining us, and now I'm going to hand over to Chris to introduce this webinar. Thank you, Chris. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Sachiv. I just wanted to begin by saying why we thought this topic would be of interest to the GODAN network and in relation to open data. And what I'm going to say, a lot of the reference points are on the European data portal, which some of you may know as an open data source. Clear difference about blockchain is that the blockchain members share the administration of the network. And this means you don't need a centrally organized administrator. And as a result, it means that there's a strong redundancy in the system because each member has a full copy of the blockchain database, so it's decentralized. It's more democratic because it's, again, not centralized in that way. It's spread across the members. It offers the transparency and traceability, which, of course, is a key part of open data. And it can work together with that to ensure that data integrity and security, even on open data systems, can be conserved by having blockchain as a backup reference point. And this works because you can set up the blockchain in different ways. So you can have a fully open to join network, public, permissionless blockchain. So in that case, everyone joins with a full permit to read and write. But in most cases, it makes more sense to at least include some authentication of the members, and that's a public permissioned blockchain. But it may, in many commercial cases, be important that the network's exclusive for a limited number of members and effectively is a private blockchain, i.e. in companies or on some government organizations. But the interesting part comes when you use this in combination with a fully open data activity. So this example from the European data portal from the city of Vienna, where they open up a data set, but they validate each one of those entries by doing a checksum and generating a hash value of a data set. So each open data entry is then recorded as a checksum on the blockchain. So you can check that the data you're looking at now corresponds to the hash value that's in the blockchain at the moment the data is created. So this provides a very easy way to search in the normal way on an open data system, but then to validate an entry using blockchain. Three main qualities then of blockchain: this decentralization, the transparency, and the fraud protection. And some overall examples of this, if we look right now in the States at access to open data, we're running into a few problems with the lapsing government funding. Data.gov is offline. Obviously, the more we can decentralize these kind of systems, have multiple copies, the more we have a built-in redundancy so that the data could be able to still be accessed. And the Harvard Review has an interesting article on this, which came out shortly after the White House changed its rules on access to open data from their activities. So that's something I do recommend to look at for the decentralization point. We're going to hear a lot of transparency uses from Jacqueline when she runs through some of the cases that we've discovered of relevance to agriculture. And finally, the key point of having these multiple copies of the blockchain and recording each entry with an encrypted hashtag, hash code, means that we can prevent fraud, and you'll hear more about that too. Looking at the other aspects of how blockchain can be used in combination with open data, it can be used in a way to reward people for actually contributing open data. So this is quite an interesting application, the Open Litter Map, as a general way of showing how to reward people for crowdsourced mapping. And there are a couple of examples in this kind of domain. But I'm going to move now and pass over to Jacqueline Bolt, who's working at Wageningen University, as part of our project on blockchains here at CTA, where we've been supporting some pilot projects, but we're building up a series of existing case studies of applications of blockchain in agriculture. And I'll pass over to her to talk a bit about those and give those cases.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So when you look at this slide, you see a lot of fields where blockchain can be used for the application for agriculture and or social development. So this is not an extensive list. There can be other applications in other sectors, for example, but this is what we found is most interesting at this point. Here you can see some of the organizations that are applying this in this field. So for example, you see on the left EtherRisk, which is applying it for insurances and finance. On the right side, with food safety and certification, you can find IBM Food Trust. And often in these cases, when it's about food safety or certification, they'll often use a closed type of blockchain. So this is a permissioned blockchain. And when we look at remittances, market access, this will often be more like an open type of blockchain, so a distributed blockchain. You also see more names on the left. I think remittances is one of the first fields where people saw opportunity to apply blockchain, which started obviously with the financial incentive of blockchain, the Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency that can be used transnationally, and this of course has many advantages because it could decrease maybe the cost, the time it would take to transfer money across. It will be easier, cheaper, faster. So in remittances, there are a lot of organizations that provide the service of a type of cryptocurrency, be it Bitcoin or other types of coins. So this is an example. This is AgUnity. AgUnity is dealing with a fair contract on the blockchain. So what they were looking at is that there are a lot of projects going on in the world who are targeting farmers in cooperatives. So they often say that working in cooperatives is better for farmers because they can pool their resources, funding, and pool the produce in order to get better prices, for example, so collaboration. But oftentimes there could be a discrepancy between the farmer supplying his produce to the cooperative and the cooperative itself. So an example is where a farmer would yield 5 kg potatoes and supply these to a cooperative, and then later the cooperative would need to pay out the farmer, which they would write down in a logbook, and then they would say, yeah, you have supplied 4 kgs of potatoes, so we will pay you out for 4 kgs. Well, sometimes it's not easy for farmers to assess whether it was 5 or 4 kgs that was written down, because not all farmers are able to verify this information from the logbook, maybe due to the fact that they can maybe not even read. But at other times it can just be a matter of opinion, difference of opinion. So what would often happen is that these farmers would go to other members of the cooperative and persuade them to leave the cooperative, leading to a collapse of the cooperative overall. So what AgUnity is doing is they provide contracts on the blockchain where both the cooperative or the receiver of the produce and the farmer fill in this information at the same time, leading to a digital contract that no party is able to amend anymore. So this is just logged into the blockchain, after which the farmer will receive the price that relates to this amount of produce. So this creates a type of contract between cooperatives and farmers where trust is basically no longer needed, as no party is able to further change this data in the future. So nor the farmer, not the cooperative, and also not Ag Unity itself is able to change this data anymore. This is an example of ether risk. So within the insurance sector, you see a lot of applications for blockchain, because one of the possibilities of blockchain is to make a smart contract. A smart contract is a self-executing contract, and it executes based on specific criteria that you give. So, for example, you can say only if action A has happened, then B will happen. And you can do that with a smart contract on the blockchain in an automated way. And what does it mean? It means that in insurance, you have this often. So only when flood has happened, or only when a drought has happened, or only if a specific action or damage has happened, then we will pay out. And an insurance company would then often need to send people over physically by car to assess the damage, and only after they have logged their data into a computer system and this data is verified and okay, then they will pay out. And this often takes a lot of time. It's costly for the insurance company. It's also inconvenient for the people enduring the damage. It can take a lot of time for them to receive payment. And this is also the case for farmers. So what the ether risk does is basically make automated payments over the blockchain using smart contracts, where they use this weather data that informs the smart contract. And once specific thresholds have been met, then payment will happen automatically to the farmers. So it's not necessary to send over people anymore. It's not necessary to physically assess this data, because they use data information which has been calibrated and verified in order to inform this payout. So you also see this in other types of insurance sectors. So you can also see this in healthcare emerging, for example. But this is a type of agricultural insurance. And this is about Ethic Hub. So Ethic Hub uses the application of remittances. So what they say is a lot of smallholders are unbankable in the world. So this makes it hard for them to invest in their business or into new projects. So it's difficult for smallholders to grow their business because they don't have proper access to finance. And for banks and finance institutions, it's difficult to finance the farmers because farmers pose a lot of risks. They often don't have credit status, but also the administrative costs for financial institutions is quite high compared to the actual payout to the farmer. So there's not a lot of margin to be gained from that for financial institutions. So what Ethic Hub does is they use the remittances part, where it's easy to transfer money across borders using digital currencies. And they call for investors, and investors can be all type of people who are willing to invest in a lucrative business, and they can see where their investment is going, and they can also see the impact of their investment for the farmers. And farmers then face lower interest rate compared to what a bank would offer if they would offer something at all. And farmers are able to benefit from this lower rate because there's more supply of loans, because there are more investors on the platform. So Ethic Hub is a platform where smallholders and investors from all over the world can meet each other to create this type of loan system. What is also nice about Ethic Hub is for the investors, they provide a guarantee fund. So in the case there's a default and the farmer is not able to pay back, they will offer a guarantee through their funding. WWF has been using blockchain technology in the tracking and tracing of tuna. So they do this in New Zealand, Fiji, where they work together with other local NGOs. What was happening in the tuna in the fishery was that often the tuna would not be maybe sustainably fished, or caught, but also the people working in this industry would often be employed by improper conditions, so not the right working hours, low wages, which WWF even has called a type of slavery. So they wanted to prevent it by tracking and tracing where the tuna was coming from exactly and where it would pass. So they use RFID chips which they use to tag the tuna, and then when the tuna goes to the processor, this RFID chip gets replaced by a type of QR code. And when the tuna gets to the market, a consumer is able to scan this QR code himself by phone, for example, and then they can track and trace exactly where this tuna has been, who has processed it, and from which area it's coming from. So this is a type of tracking and tracing. Obviously, in this case, the tunas are still complete, but mostly when we as consumers buy tuna, it's not complete. We buy it in a can, or we buy a part of the tuna. So this is just the first case to see how it can be applied, but they're definitely working on further shaping this into parts of tuna. How can they trace that? How can they make it possible for consumers to check where this is coming from? So what blockchain does in this tracking and tracing is not, this RFID chipping and the QR code, it's not a new way of tracking or tracing. So that part is not really new, and that is also not what blockchain does. But what blockchain does is, because this data that has been entered into this value chain, because this data cannot be altered by any player, it gives the end consumer more certainty on what has transpired. So of course the data that has been put in the beginning of the value chain still needs to be correct and objective and reliable. So that does not change. But then once it has entered this value chain, the consumer has more certainty on what has transpired. And also you see this tracking and tracing in a lot of other commodities. So many producers are experimenting with this. So this is a case of Moji coffee, and they use this tracking and tracing for cherry collection for coffee. And they focus more on the wages that the coffee pickers or collectors have been earning. So what they do, they track and trace the coffee. So when you buy a bag of coffee in the Netherlands, for example, there will be a QR code on the side of the package, and you can scan that with your phone and then see information like on this slide. So here you can see, for example, that a certain person in a certain on a certain date has received this price. So you can see the market price and the price that this person has received, because they want to make sure that the farmer has been receiving the fair wages. So now as a consumer, you can also verify that this farmer has received a fair wage by the purchase that you have made. I think now, because this blockchain technology has not been fully regulated, a lot of producers are still experimenting a lot with this. So these are all front runners who are trying to embed it into their current supply and value chains. But of course, we also need to ask ourselves, what type of information would be good to communicate to the consumers? Is it really necessary to show all of this information about farmers? And we should also, of course, be very conscious about the type of information that we share and publish, especially because on a blockchain, this information cannot be changed anymore, and it will be on there. So we need to be conscious about what type of information will we use and how we'll we use it, and how will we then communicate it. This is an example where they did think about that very consciously. So this is Fair Food, and they are also working on traceability of different commodities. So for example, they started with coconuts, which you can see on the left bottom, where you can also see as a consumer, where does it come from, and did this person receive a fair wage? So they do this two ways. As a consumer, you can scan the code and see who has produced it. They also think it's very important to provide a story about this person, more information, but they have also verified with this person if they would like that. And mostly these farmers are very willing to share their stories. And in return, they also want to learn about the consumers. So not only from the consumers have to get more information about the farmers, but the farmers also want to see where their produce is going, who is using it, and can they maybe learn more about the consumers. They also have an app where farmers can connect to, and the farmers will give, for example, 5 kg of coconuts, and then Fair Foods will say, okay, the fair price for coconuts will be, for example, $2, and then they will go back to the farmer and say, okay, the fair price for coconuts is $2. Have you received $2, yes or no? And then the farmer will verify that, and then the data will enter the blockchain. So Fair Foods is now working with more and more producers. Now they're looking more into spices and herbs from different countries. So they are active in a lot of different countries around the world. This is a totally different case. This is about land ownership. So they've started in London, but also working in Australia, I think. And now they've moved more towards Africa. So they're based in Ghana and Kenya, for example. And they say, yeah, a problem in Kenya is that people used to move around a lot with their cattle, and it used to be common practice to use lands of other people to let your cattle graze. But now it's becoming very complicated, and the land registrations are not in place or don't really work. So it's often not clear whose land it is. Another thing that often happens is that people will sell land that's not theirs to sell. So then lands get sold multiple times, even though that's actually not a legal practice or feasible. So what they do is they made an online land registry, and then this platform can be used for various things. So to see who is using your land, and if you could maybe ask for a little bit of like a user's fee, but also what has happened to this land, who owns it, who has owned it in the past. So it also enables people to become entrepreneurs of their own lands, to see if they can rent it out or make a business out of this. So it deals with multiple functionalities. Of course, if I go back to the last slide, with the land registration app, it's very important to work together with the local authorities, because of course the local authorities often have land registration administration types of offices. They also have legislation. They have a lot of procedures for purchasing land, selling land. So Land Lay-by is working together closely with the local governments to see how they can implement this. In other countries, for example in India, the government itself is looking into blockchain and to see how they can implement it in their own governmental structure, which has also happened in Sweden, for example, where they work together with the cadastre. AgriWallet is looking at financing and savings of farmers. So this is an overview of how their full ecosystem works. So if you go to the middle top, then you see farmers, and farmers produce specific commodities. Now they sell these to buyers, and then the buyers can pay out the farmers. And in this ecosystem of AgriWallet, they do that by paying out in money, but also keeping a little bit aside for savings. So AgriWallet is a mobile app linked to M-Pesa. M-Pesa is a mobile payment system in Kenya, and most people in Kenya, they pay with M-Pesa. So instead of cash, they will often use M-Pesa. And when farmers need financing from local banks, for example, it's very difficult for them to obtain this finance because they often don't have credit status, and basically for all of the reasons that I've mentioned previously. So how can they obtain a credit status, and how can they actually save? So AgriWallet provides in it by saying we made a token. So a token is a type of a cryptocurrency which is earmarked, and they say we make a token and this token can be used within this ecosystem. So meaning farmers can pay with these tokens to input suppliers, and input suppliers will accept the tokens and then provide inputs like seeds and fertilizers. And then farmers will sell their produce to the buyers, and buyers will then sell or give money to the farmers through M-Pesa, but will also give part of the money in tokens. And farmers can use these tokens then again for the input supplies. Well, by having these small savings, the tokens, so they can only use the tokens for input supply, but they don't always have to buy input supply. So they always have some savings in the form of tokens. And because they have these savings, and these savings are can be shared, this information about savings can be shared with lenders. Lenders are more willing to provide farmers with additional savings. So because farmers are able to save in the form of tokens, they have now access to additional loans. And this can provide them with a type of credit status. And this type of system, this is a small system, but this type of ecosystem is also something that a lot of organizations in Africa are looking at, creating better credit status for farmers in order to access finance. So this is an overview of the remittances. So in the world, so in developing and emerging markets, a lot of people are very dependent on remittances. So remittances is money sent by people who moved abroad from these developing and emerging markets, who send money back home. And it is often said that this amount exceeds the money that goes around in aid, funding by aid, by multiplication of 2 or 3. So this money is very important for emerging markets, but it is very expensive, difficult. It costs a lot of time to transfer this money from, for example, the Netherlands to Ghana, or from the UK to Pakistan, or from the US to the Philippines. It can take several days sometimes for the money to reach the person by using conventional money transfer organizations. So by using a cryptocurrency, you can send money sometimes almost instantly. There's still transaction costs, but usually lower compared to conventional methods. It depends on but there's also a lot of risks involved because there's no legislation in place. Money can be lost. The transaction is a little bit more difficult to understand. And it's also very unclear which coins are good to trust and which are more unreliable. So it's a risky business, but it's also a lucrative business for a lot of people to use this money this money to transfer. Now, I've talked a little bit about tokens in the Agri wallet case, where they made a specific token that could be used within this ecosystem. Well, as a person sending money back home, you can also earmark this money. So you can also use a token. And when you use a token, it basically means that you can program the money. And that means that the money can only be spent on a specific goal. So in the Agri wallet case, the token that farmers would have could physically only be spent on fertilizers and seeds, so input supplies for the farm. If the farmer would use the money for other things, it would be physically impossible. They could not spend it. So only on the goals that are programmed into the money. So this could also be applied to remittances, where a person who sends back money to their home country could only be spent on a specific goal. And Risky Biz has tried this out with people from Nigeria. So people in the Netherlands coming from Nigeria would send back money home, but they were often afraid that this money would be spent on other things, like alcohol, for example. So they said, I want to send back money, but I want it to be spent on healthcare or education. And in healthcare in Nigeria, it can be difficult to receive the proper healthcare. So there are a lot of scams going on in healthcare. It's often difficult to really assess if the medicines that have been bought by your health provider are actually really validated medicines, really the proper brands, for example. So there's a lot of knockoff medicines in Nigeria. So the people, the Nigerians living in the Netherlands said, I want to send back home, I want to send back money for my family members who need healthcare, but I want them to receive the proper healthcare. So RiskyBiz has worked together with a healthcare provider who would look up hospitals who were using the proper brands of medicines. And the money that would be sent back could only be spent in hospitals that would use this proper healthcare and these proper medicines. So people would send back money to Nigeria. In Nigeria, this person who would receive the money would log in with their phone into the hospital. And when this was verified by the hospital, so there was a two-way verification of the person receiving the money and the hospital. And once that has been verified, and it had been verified that the proper medicines were being subscribed, only then would the money be received and the person would receive the proper healthcare. So we've been discussing this with a lot of working groups in Kenya and Ghana, if people would feel comfortable with that they could only spend on specific goals. Well, when it was about private funding, people didn't really like it because they felt they needed to be free to spend this money. But when we were talking to entrepreneurs and farmers, they were very, very willing because it would save them a lot of time to verify legitimate input suppliers. Because what was happening in the knockoff medicines from improper healthcare, it also happens in agriculture where people cannot trust the input suppliers for proper inputs. So these farmers working with these input suppliers, they're very willing to accept this earmark money, for example, because it also saves them a lot of hassle, and they are sure that they at least receive the proper inputs. So this is also something, this earmark money, this program money is also in development, where you see more and more initiatives working to apply this. So if you want any more information about the initiatives that I've just discussed with you, you can check these websites, but you can also check our series, our blockchain series, where we also discuss some of these cases in further detail.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. That's really helpful and very informative webinar from you and Chris. So now we will open the webinar now for discussions and questions from the participants. May I request all the participants to use the chat window to put your questions, and then we can answer them one by one. Meanwhile, while we are waiting for the questions, can I ask one question to you, Jacqueline? Because one of the examples you mentioned on the land registration. Did I understand correctly? So this system is is it a prototype or is it actually being used now?
Well, the platform is built, and it is. So I think what happens now is that people who are willing to put their land on it, they will put it on, but it is still in development. So I think they want to really register every square meter on the platform. But yeah, they are experiencing a lot of difficulties with local authorities, because what blockchain does is it's decentralization. So every type of central organization is often not very much looking forward to this development. So I think it's just work in progress.
Thank you very much. So we now have another question from Solangi Titiro, who is asking, between which sides a smart contract is being signed? Is it possible to be done just with the presence of the farmer, and who else on the other side?
Do you want to answer it, or? Okay, I think it depends very much on the context. What a smart contract, a smart contract can be between two persons. It can be between a person and an organization, but it can also be with an object or a thing. So that's a little bit. So an example is between a farmer and a cooperative. So a farmer and a cooperative both enter into this app, and then the app forms, the platform forms a smart contract. And a smart contract is basically, so it's a self-executing. It's basically programming language. So it's an automated contract. once A happens, or once a threshold has been reached, or once a payment has been received, or in some cases it can be with data that comes from a government. So once someone has received a certification or a diploma, or once a person has died, only then B will happen. And when A has not happened, then B will never happen. So that is basically how that works.
Right. Thank you. And Solangi has also asked another question. What do you do for products like flowers or fruits that the quality can be decreased due to transportation?
Yeah, so the physical value chain does not change with blockchain. So blockchain does not change anything to how things currently run. What it does is it creates a digital twin, meaning that aside from the physical value chain, there's now also a digital value chain running along with what physically happens. And this digital value chain, this cannot be changed. So this is something that can be verified at the end, but also during the value chain to see what has happened in the past. So with flowers and fruits, it would just go exactly the way it goes now. The only thing is, if it's now in the blockchain, then a consumer can see what has happened to it, or the consumer can see whatever data you have put into the blockchain. So it can be about the quality, it can be about the wages, it can be about the circumstances on which they have been produced. Whatever you have data on, you can put it in the blockchain, and then the end user or the stakeholders along the chain can verify this data or can assess this data.
Okay, thank you. There's another question from Patrick who is asking, how do you deal with trade policies? Is there any role for government in the transactions?
Perhaps I can say a bit on that. I mean, obviously, in the transactions we're talking about, it's still governed by the normal legislation. When you're looking at how blockchain interacts with trade policies, it can even enhance or be part of the implementation of that trade policy. We have an example right now with the UK leaving Europe, where blockchain is being proposed as one of the mechanisms to deal with trade across the border between North and Southern Ireland. So it's not that blockchain in this case, in relation to trade, diverts what's already happening in existing systems. So legitimate trade would still be subject to the same regulations. Government is getting involved in how this can be licensed. And as I say, they're using it as an application, or at least looking at it as a technology to actually reinforce trade policies and smooth particularly the cross-border trade.
I see. Thank you, Chris. Ben is asking a question. How can those on the network track false information or input on the blockchain?
So does it mean, do they mean the fully decentralized network? Or do they mean within the value chain? Well, I mean, so how it works, how blockchain works is basically it's a decentralized system. So you can compare this to a classroom. Let's say we have a classroom full of people, and these people are all, so this can be an example of nodes in the network. So the network of blockchain uses different nodes, and in the classroom, the different people represent these nodes. So if I give a present to one person in the classroom, and I will ask his name, and he says, my name is Eric, and everybody can hear it, then everybody knows that I gave a present to Eric. Now, what will happen? I will ask the class, who did I give the present to? And there's usually a person who answers first, so they all yell together, Eric, and the person who answers first receives a small reward. So there's an incentive to answer fast and to answer the right answer, because they will get a small reward. Now, if this person would say, so I would give the present to Eric, and everybody would have seen that because it's verifiable on the blockchain, for example, in real life. And so if I say, who did I give the present to? And someone else will say Mark, then the majority of the class will probably say, no, you're wrong, because it's not Mark, it's actually Eric, because we've all seen it. So what will happen if you put in wrong information into the blockchain? It's exactly what would happen in the classroom. The majority would disagree. And if you have a very small group, if you only have 4 people, then maybe you can try to convince the other 3 people to give the wrong answer too, right? To say, no, it's actually Mark. But the bigger the classroom is, the more difficult it is to persuade to all of these people to give the wrong answer. So with the blockchain network now, we have a lot of nodes. So it's a really big classroom. So whenever someone tries to give the wrong answer, it becomes almost impossible to ask all of these people to give the wrong answer. So what happens when somebody gives false information? Well, the majority will reject the information, and this transaction will be thrown off the network, and it will be disregarded. They will not pay attention to it.
Thank you for that. So, another question is from my one of the questions is on, what is the kind of the entry entry barriers for example, many of the smallholder farmers might be might be illiterate or might not have that much knowledge of the technologies. So, for example, how can they also benefit from these technologies? For example, smart contract. For example, you give an example of the smart contract. Imagine if you are working with a developing country in a rural area with illiterate farmers who might not have literacy levels. Literacy levels are low. In those conditions, is there like a practical examples you can share with us on some of the challenges you faced, or some success stories or something like that?
Yeah, I think Fairfood is an organization that has been looking at this. So what is the type of information that the farmers would be able to deal with? So it's not always necessarily that they have to type in an amount or have to read. You can also make it a red or a green square. Like if they agree, it's green, and if they don't agree, it's just red. So you can make all different types of interfaces that are where it is possible for these farmers to join such an application.
Thank you very much. So we have questions coming in. Martin Wies is asking, saying, I have read the following study titled Blockchain Study Finds 0.00% success rate and vendors don't call back when asked for evidence. So I don't know what exactly he saw. 0% success rate. So Martin Weiss, I don't know if, is there any specific question you are trying to ask, or because I think he's referencing some study where the success rate is basically 0. Maybe if you send, what I suggest, Martin, is maybe if you can email your maybe the link of the study to either Chris or Jacqueline later, and then they can get back to you on what exactly is the specific study. But there is another question from Adivali who's asking. Chris, go on.
No, it was all right, Martin. We'll respond to you. I think on the list we'll put that up, because I see that you put the URL in another part on the questions section. So we'll respond to that. As with any questions we don't cover in the time today on the discussion group.
Yes, thank you, guys. And there is another question from Adivali who is asking, does CTA has training programs on blockchain for professionals in agriculture?
Yeah, at the present time, we'll be looking at some support measures for developers and those interested in blockchain. So we'll advertise that through this group. And also you'll see more and more material appear on the blockchain project link, which is on that last slide on the screen now, www.cta.int/en/blockchain. So we'll make announcements there, and it's likely we will have other events like this where we can exchange information, but no formal training course at the present time.
Thank you. We have another question from Aris who is asking, how do you think blockchain technologies have been adapted and being used throughout Europe nowadays, and what is its perspective for the future?
I think for a really up-to-date view, it's worth visiting the European Union's blockchain portal, where they map out all the initiatives, a lot of the initiatives happening in Europe right now, and many more of these are in a business phase, a whole suite of applications, not just in agriculture. But you'll find that site has got a number, it's basically got a global map, and then most of the entries are obviously for Europe as it's an EU project. But that's a good reference point to really see what's happening and to get the latest state of the art on what's happening around Europe.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Jerry who is asking, what is the adaptation of blockchain technology in Africa? And he's particularly interested, is any examples from Nigeria you are aware of?
I think so. I don't know all of the initiatives in Africa because, to be fair, also within blockchain initiatives, things are changing by the day. But I do know that most blockchain initiatives that we have seen in Africa do come from Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria. And from Nigeria, what stands out is that most of these initiatives focus on transferring of money. So like I explained with the remittances, but also a lot of platforms that can be used to transfer money from Nigeria to another country or from another country towards Nigeria. And I think that makes sense because in the field of remittances, Nigeria is a very important and large player. So those are the first applications. I also see that in Ghana and Kenya, where people are already very familiar with mobile payments, so payments using their telephones, their adaptation might be a little bit easier. But the connotation with blockchain, or especially with Bitcoin or crypto, is very negative. So organizations working in those countries often try to avoid these words. So that's why, for example, AgriWallet focuses on tokens and AgriWallet, and they never mention crypto. Well, they, in a sense, they use a form of crypto, but they don't mention it. So that is also, how that works with the adaptation.
Thank you very much. Another question, because I remember, Jacqueline, one of the examples you gave was on this, the WWF examples of the tuna tracking and tracing. And I just wanted to ask you, are you aware of any other examples, for example, like, any big like supermarket chains using this technology for general, food tracking, for example, agriculture produce tracking or something like that? Is there any operational kind of examples in practice, or are you aware of any of them planning to do this in the future?
Yes, I think various supermarkets are planning to do so, but it's also risky. So, for example, Albert Heijn in the Netherlands is a large supermarket chain, and they've supermarket chain, and they've implemented blockchain for tracking and tracing of oranges from Brazil, and then it became apparent that they were not produced under very nice conditions. So it gives them a lot of heat from the media. Well, actually, that's exactly what blockchain was for, to give more insight into what had happened. We also know that in the United States, some supermarket chains are working together with IBM technology, where they use Hyperledger for tracking and tracing. We don't know a lot about that. I think it's just still in the beginning phase. And they also, like, Hyperledger is a closed type of blockchain, so it's very different.
Thank you for the answer. So we have another question from Lars, who is asking, how does one practically deal with the mentioned redundancy and the amount of data being stored? What are the limitations in terms of scale? So this is more about the data volumes. So if you are thinking about these technologies, you will have huge amounts of data, also data storage needs. So this question is basically asking, what is the practical methods of dealing with this amount of data being stored and redundancy?
There are three types of solutions, but I think that is he's talking about the overall blockchain technology, I think, right?
I think so, from what I could understand.
Yeah, so it is limited in scale, but there are also some solutions of dealing with that, but these have not been fully implemented yet. So I think there's a lot of awareness of, yeah, this is a problem, not only the scaling, but also the use of energy, and also, for example, the type of programming languages being used, like being Turing compatible and all of these things. So this is just yeah, work in development.
I see. Thank you.
We can go more into detail. If he's interested, just send me a message and I can send you some more information about this.
Yes, in fact, for those of you who are listening, both Chris and Jacqueline's email is also now put in the chat window, so you can, and it's also in the presentation slides, so you can contact them at any time for any specific further queries you have. So there's another question coming. What is the average cost of setting up a blockchain for a network of 30 members? Any kind of rough ideas, basically?
No, I think so. He's talking about a network of 30 members. So I think the most important thing that I want to mention during this presentation is that what problem are you trying to solve? Is there an issue of trust? Is there an issue where you have a middleman that is taking up a lot of margin that is really unnecessary? So is that the case? And if so, what can you do to solve that? And is blockchain then maybe a solution? So if you have a network of 30 members, then what is the trust issue? And if these people are together as 30 members, maybe there's something, if they don't trust each other, then maybe, and they are all part of the same organization, then maybe first you should have a look at the organization to see if you can solve these trust issues. If these are 30 members who need to work with each other, but there are trust issues, yeah, then you can try to set up a blockchain system. I cannot tell you what the average cost is because, yeah, it just differs so much. I don't think we have a very clear answer on that one.
Okay,
do you?
yes.
I think there's one other thing to consider is that many of the applications we've shown and most of the people we're speaking to, they're choosing a technical partner who already has that blockchain system that they're then adding an interface to for the particular application. And that's why the cost varies so much, depending on how close it is to an existing authorization system. There are a number, for example, with certification. The firm Provenance already offers that in a series of different certification applications. So it's also a question of getting those offers from the relevant organization. And of course, it varies so much depending on whether the application's based on some simple data entry or whether it's going to be automated using Internet of Things, whether it's going to involve a predictive model like the one for the automatic payout of insurance. There's a huge variety there, I'm afraid. But we'll certainly look in and see if we can give more of a guide towards that. And if we can put something together, we'll put that up on the site.
Yes, you can also check the blockchain series where we've interviewed some initiatives and some of them go into detail to which technical partners they have used and if it was expensive for them, who were their most important partners in the process, what did they learn from the process and what was difficult. So that maybe also provides a little bit of lessons learned.
I see. We have another following up. There was a question before from Martin on the success rate. So the question Martin was asking was, though blockchain has been touted as the answer to everything, a study of 43 solutions advanced in the international development sector has found exactly no evidence of success. Do we have evidence yet of success? This is Martin's query.
Sorry, I didn't fully get it and I can't read the question,
Yeah,
but I think it is.
The question was Martin was asking about blockchain, but he didn't reference the study. So he's referencing some study which looked at 43 solutions advanced in the international development sector, and this particular study had found exactly no evidence of success. So he's asking if there is evidence of success. one suggestion I will request Martin is, please do send this particular study you are referencing, the link of that article as well, maybe later to both Jacqueline and Chris as well, so then they can exactly know, because you didn't provide that information. It's very difficult for them to answer, but
no, but it's okay. It's okay. I think I can answer. I think so. It's a very new technology, so there's still a lot of experimentation going on. Also, the implications of using it are not always clear. It is obviously not regulated. It's quite difficult to work with, also because, as I said, it's decentralization, where our current society is almost fully run by central organizations. So it's all very new and experimental. I also think that in the enthusiasm of this new technology, it was often mentioned in the media that blockchain would be the answer to everything. So a lot of organizations started to experiment with this, where I just have explained that, yeah, if you have an issue with trust or whatever, you can try to consider using blockchain technology. But if you don't, if you're an organization that has no trust issues, there might not be a point to use it. And a lot of examples are examples where, yeah, you could think, why did these people consider to use blockchain technology? What was the problem they were actually trying to solve? And I think there are a lot of remittances platforms. So there are a lot of money transfer platforms. I think those make sense. If they didn't, there wouldn't be so many, I think. And I also think that some of the examples that I've shown today, for example, EtherRisk, WWF, Egg Unity. I think Egg Unity is also a very clear example of where it would work, and it works, and people are reaping the benefits from that one. So I think, yeah, it depends on the initiative, and it also depends maybe on what you would consider success.
Okay,
I think we've also emphasized this in a recent publication, the ICT update. I mean, CTA got involved to really assess what's going on in this area and to try and bring some of these cases together. And that's exactly why we're doing this project. But I think you'll find some interesting things there on some reality checks in terms of what the successful areas are. And that's exactly why we're doing the application. But it's important to map out all of the areas with potential and then really assess in which particular areas this is working and has a role to play in relation to agriculture and rural development.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm aware that we are now nearing the time, our 1 hour time slot. So I'll just, final question. There are many questions coming in. What we will do is, if there are more questions, we can get back to you later. So you are more than welcome to email us with your questions or in the discussions board. But one final question I will ask both presenters is, there is a question on how can AgTech Innovation Labs collaborate with CTA, any department. So if somebody wants to collaborate on this topic with CTA, or who can they contact?
Yeah, I'm happy now. My email address is there. If you want to contact me, please do so.
I think so.
And we can go from there. But there are a number of initiatives and structures with opportunities. And I think, again, we'll post some of that background information to the list.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chris. And thank you very much, Jacqueline, for this very informative webinar. And it's very good to see the lot of interest in these topics, as evident from the questions and discussions that we had. And we will make sure that after the webinar, once this recording is shared with the wider community, you are more than welcome to continue these discussions, any specific discussion, either directly with the presenters, or if you think it is of general interest, please use the mailing list of the GODAN Capacity Development Working Group to share the ideas or share any good practices. For example, if the participants, if of today they are aware of any other examples of in different areas of agriculture in blockchain, please share those examples with the wider community as well. So I want to take this opportunity to thank again all the participants as well for joining us for this webinar, as well as the presenters. And I want to thank CTA in particular specifically for helping in organizing, or not only organizing but hosting all this webinar. When without their help, which is we won't be able to have these webinars hosted and shared with all of you. So I want to once again thank all colleagues in CTA and all of you for joining us today. So thank you all, and see you all in our next webinar. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.